Hello, welcome to the March 6, 2026 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can submit questions in advance by sending an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de or simply asking your question in the live chat field. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer questions in a real-time manner may soon be impossible with the number of questions as they come in. And if we could avoid asking the same question repeatedly, if you don't see an immediate response, that would be appreciated. It just allows us to get through more questions. When asking questions, it's always helpful if you could specify like which version of the program you're running. So if it's Cubase, it could be version 13, 14, 15, what level. So if it's going to be Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, and which operating system, that information is helpful. Also, we should have an index of all of the topics that are covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream ends, so you could quickly navigate to particular topics. And if you wanted to search different topics that have been covered in previous live streams for almost the last 6 years since we kind of kicked it up with COVID, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan for creating that website. We have two people that serve as moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K. They're not Steinberg employees. They just really wanted to make it a better community experience, so we appreciate their efforts. And we'll give Jazz Dude an extra round of gratitude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products. And I'm the host today. I'm presenting from just outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching live or afterwards, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. One quick programming note, I know sometimes when we have the daylight saving times with the clock change, that the time zones, the time change will happen at different times in different countries. In the United States, we are adjusting our clocks. I think we're springing forward 1 hour. I think it's spring forward, fall back, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're in a different country outside the United States, just be aware that the live stream may be an hour different for the start time. I believe it's going to be reflected if you go to the YouTube channel into the live area. You could see the exact time. So just a quick heads up that if we start an hour before or an hour later, just kind of check the time because I will be going with local times in the United States for that. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin. All right, so we see Jazz Dude recommending kind of a YouTube playlist. I think it's the Alice by No Videos. Does a great job. All right, we see Klaus Olsen joining from Malmo, Sweden. We have Tim K joining from Zeiss in the Netherlands. His cat Buddy is waving a paw hello to my cat Steven, Mark Rabin's dog Stella, and Mia and other pets that are nearby. All right, we see Mark Rabin on from Montana. Everyone give a big woof to Stella, Mark Rabin's dog. I enjoyed listening to your new release. Listened to it last week, Mark. Congratulations on getting it done. A lot of really interesting songs and great drum sounds you got. All right. All right, we see Captain Energy Music from Pennsylvania just saying happy Friday to everyone. Great to have you on. All right, we have Stefan from Sweden. Thanks for being part of the community today. All right, of course, we have Jazz Dude on. All right, so Conscious Power 6302 says, when opening an old Cubase project in a newer version like Cubase 13, is pressing Save Control S enough to convert it to the new version, or should we always use Save As? So as soon as you open up like a previous versions, and if you save it in 15, then it will automatically be kind of saved in 15. You know, for the most part, Steinberg does, I think, a really good job of being kind of backward compatible. But if it's using like features in 15 that don't exist in in other versions. Like if you use a new modulator that wasn't available in earlier versions, that may not carry over, but generally when you save it in the latest version, it would be that. But there may not be any significant changes if it's not utilizing newer features and functions that are unique to the later versions of the program. There we see Tony Trunzo joining us from Australia. Thanks for getting up super early on Saturday morning. Virtual Alan joining, saying hi to everyone from Scotland. All right, and we have Soren joining from Sweden. All right, so we see from Conscious Power, it says, why create drum map from instrument isn't available in a drum machine like Groove Agent? It's grayed out in the editor. So I think that when we work with a particular, if we're working with the drum machine, when we come over, we could just go, so it doesn't necessarily tie directly over to the drum map, but I think most people that would be utilizing it are going to be, it's kind of, so let's go ahead and I'll just add a drum track here. And by default, this will be added as a pattern event. When I come over here, we can now, let's go ahead and just load up a quick preset. But now when we go to, and I realize that this is different, but when we go to the pattern editor, we can see that the names are all, directly carried over. So that as soon as we put in kind of our different sources here, that we could see all of the names from the drum machine carried directly over to the pattern editor. I haven't found a way to get this pattern editor into the drum into a particular drum map, but I think the design intention was that most of the people are kind of using the drum machine coupled with this, and I realized that you could use the drum machine with standard MIDI editors or with the drum editor, but currently it's automatically extracted into the pattern editor, not into the drum editor like a Groove Agent instance would be. All right, so we see Beverly Beatty joining from Vancouver. Thanks for being part of the community today. We see VS Terranova joining from Amsterdam. We see Vince as Flyv joining from Winnipeg. We see Mickey Praise Music just says thanks. We have Nico Thomason joining from Hamina. We have Mike from New Jersey. I can pronounce that with confidence. All right. We see Val joining from Vienna. All right, and we see Mickey Praise Music says my name is Michael from Nigeria. Thanks for being online with us today. So we see from Captenergy Music asks, hey Greg, I hope you're doing fantastic, doing wonderful. It says, just curious, not sure where Steinberg US is. I thought California. I heard Yamaha's moving to Georgia. Will that affect Steinberg as well? So the Yamaha office is in Buena Park, and currently Yamaha is the US distributor, so that's where our office would be, in Buena Park, California. So it's in Los Angeles, just technically right across the border from Los Angeles County. It's in Orange County, California, like right off the 91 in Buena Park, not far from Anaheim. So the Yamaha office isn't moving. I think Yamaha used to have a manufacturing factory in Georgia maybe 10, 15 years ago, where I think they did manufacturing of like club series speakers. I could be mistaken on that, but Yamaha isn't moving to the U.S., and the current Steinberg office is at the Yamaha headquarters in Buena Park, California. So just like 5 miles from Disneyland. All right, so we see Roland stuff sending greetings from a soggy Sussex on the south coast of England. All right, so we see Tim K says, just sharing a tip, says click the three dots in the upper right of the window to activate timestamps that can help with understanding the pacing of questions and answers, and he says he finds it helpful. We see kind words about Alice Bino from Tim Weinheimer. All right, so we see from Flyv asks, for some reason on my main song template, when it starts, the marker tab is red and I have to change it. So let's see if we start a new project here. All right, let's add, let's say, a marker track. And let's add a few audio tracks. All right, so now as we come over here, so let me know because if we come here to the markers and if I hold down Alt or Option, we could select different colors for our marker track. So let's see if I save this, we'll say, let's save as Flyv March 6. I will close this particular project. And let's get to our recent projects and see if that. So you might just have to change the particular color of the marker track, and maybe it shows up red because it's the first color in your palette of colors. But if you just kind of click here with the Alt or Option key, you could just select different colors for your marker track. So maybe it's red is your primary marker track. And if you're doing that as a template, I'll save this as a template as well with the green. So let's save as template. Okay, I will close this. Let's go to a new project and we'll start it from the template. Okay, so we're starting with our template here. We'll activate it, and we can see that that color persists in a template. So maybe it's like if you added that track first, that it's always going to use the first color depending on your preferences on coloring. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, wonderful to see Kristen and David checking in from Nashville, Tennessee. Hope you guys are well. Just thinking about you guys. All right, so we see Conscious Power says, as long as I remember, Create Drum Map from Instrument was introduced in Groove Agent 6. It was not there in Groove Agent 5. Anyways, thanks, Greg. Yeah, it definitely was there in Groove Agent 5. I think Groove Agent 4 brought it. So if you have Groove Agent 5, it's the automatic. So when it kind of works the same way. So we can go to like a Groove Agent track, and we load up a kit. See our kit name here, and now when we go to our drum map, you could just create drum map from instrument. So it works with also some, so now that we have that created, we can see that that particular drum map is automatically created. So some Howling Sonic SE drum kits will automatically do it as well. So All right, so we see from Eddie Brophy 1430 has the audio dropout and clicks problem on playback been fixed? Does anybody know? So generally, it isn't an issue when you have pops and clicks. It could be that maybe they're depending on your system. So if you're on Windows, it could be something that is causing interrupts into the audio stream that affects the audio performance. And there's a utility on a Windows platform called Latency Mon. It's by Resplendence Systems. So LATENCYMON, Latency Mon. And that's a utility that could point out different components on a Windows system that could be causing interrupts in the audio stream. But generally, it's not an issue unless there's like a piece of hardware in your PC that is saying, while audio is playing, all of a sudden it goes, okay, I'm looking for a Wi-Fi network. I'm looking for this. I'm looking, for a video call to the GPU, something along those lines. So you shouldn't have, generally dropouts is going to be a systemic thing, like, you particular to your system and not in general. But let me know what system you have, and I'm sure probably Jazz Dude will post a link to Latency Mon. He's usually on top of it, but you can check that out. All right, we see Brian Sawyer joining from Yuma, Arizona. Hope your wife is recovering from her foot surgery. She's in my thoughts. All right, we see Uno Memento joining from Finland. Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. All right, MG Lax 35 says, coming over from Logic Pro, what's the best way to stream output of Cubase to OBS? Do you use Control Room for that? So it could really depend on your particular audio interface. So like my interface I'm using is a Steinberg interface, but Rode and other Yamaha and other companies have something similar. So like I could just use my so when I have like one particular audio interface here, we could choose to do like my Steinberg UR24C. There's also a Steinberg UR24C streaming music driver and a voice driver. So if you wanted to connect a microphone in, you could have like your DAW, you could use the DAW driver, and then when you're in OBS, you use the streaming/music driver. Now, if your system doesn't have a driver that's capable of being split like that, Steinberg does have a utility called MixKey, and you could download this free. And what this is going to allow you to do is you could set up Cubase as an audio, as an input, as well as other devices. And then we could just set this up as a source. And then when you go into OBS, just simply select MixKey. And then you could have your microphone, like your web browser, as well as audio from Cubase and other programs that are all kind of mixed together in a software driver. And then you just use the MixKey driver within OBS, and that could route all of the Cubase audio over to that. So give those suggestions a quick try, but you could definitely do it. All right, so Michael Teams has granted Brian 1 gallon of strawberry swirl ice cream. All right, so we see Mike Reeves, just says Thomastown, Georgia, says my S2115H monitors were built there, so it's the Yamaha factory. Michael Teams granted Jazz Dude 1 gallon of chocolate float ice cream. All right, so we see DJ Eric Fox says, hello, Greg. I'm trying to sync the stems from a song that has not been recorded to a metronome tempo track. How can I detect the tempo of all of them at once and make them play by the tempo? All right, so let's go ahead and I'll just open up a project here, like a multi-track. Okay, so let's say I have stems and they're not recorded to a click track. All right, so let's say I'm here, and if I turn my click track on now, there's no correlation between the click track and the recording. So I'm gonna let's listen to the overhead mics. All right, so I'm gonna take the overhead mic track here. Let's go to our project, to our tempo track, and let's do a quick tempo detection. So we're gonna analyze. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a quick listen to it. Okay, so let's say that's, so let's go ahead and listen to all the tracks here. So we figured out kind of what our tempo is. Now, as we do this, I'm just gonna, it's basically does our time signature in 1/4 time because we don't know exactly what the meter is. We don't assume that the meter is in 4/4. Many times it is, but let's say we have our signature track here. And in this case, I may have pickup notes. All right, so right there is where our downbeat is. So I'm going to go to my signature track and say, okay, this is where our 4/4 starts. So now as we listen to it, so now we figured out kind of what the tempo is, and what we want to do at this point is just say, okay, I want to take this particular file. I'm going to select all of the files in the project. And then what we want to do is basically take these tempo changes and automatically embed the tempo changes of every beat into the files. And we do that by going to your audio menu, to advanced, and we'll say set definition from tempo. So we could save this metadata in a project only or into the audio files. So if we're going to do it in other projects and we didn't want to repeat the process, we could save it into the audio files directly. You hit OK, right? And it's basically, now we can see like this little icon appear in the upper right hand corner. So at this point, if we want it to do like different tempo changes to the file, I could come over here. We can see it. So if we say roughly or maybe 140 beats a minute, I'm going to turn this off and just type in 140 for my tempo. Now it's going to play back a perfectly steady tempo. If I want this to be 156 instead. So what was varying in tempo is now completely straight because we were basically turned off the tempo track and it's playing back a steady tempo. If I wanted to take those particular files and let's say, okay, I want this to slow down over time, so as we do this, but still have kind of the same contours as roughly speeding up and slowing down. Then when we get to here, it's going to go to our normal tempo. And then if I wanted to take the tempo performance here and kind of straighten it up to tighten it up, or just raise this part up just a little bit, make it tighter. So it's original tempo. Now this is tempo that's been kind of straightened. So once we do that, we could manipulate the tempo however we want. And since we've done the tempo detection, applied that tempo detection to the files, so the tempo detection, select like an event that's, makes sense. So it could be a kick drum or overhead drums like I used. Do the tempo detection. Once you've done that, you could select multiple events or a single event, go to advanced to set definition from tempo. So after you select the particular events, So set definition from tempo, and then you could manipulate the tempo map however you want to make stuff be perfectly in time, or take two different tracks and have them automatically be in time as well. So let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, we see Roland stuff says, I'm just downloading the Pro Guitar Bundle on a substantial offer at the moment. Thanks, Steinberg. Yeah, to see if I can get that one too. It looks good. I think it's 45 gigabytes of guitar loops and stuff. All right, so we see from FlyV says, yeah, I see it work for you there, Greg. Thanks. Going to recreate the template and save it and see if the color stays. All right, so we see Latency Mon's link has been posted by Jazz Dude. Thank you for doing that. All right, we have Omar joining from France. We have Non-Delusional checking in from Newport, Rhode Island. My mother-in-law grew up there. All right, Nazar Hadidian says, greetings from Michigan, Greg. While recording on the fly using key switches, in time I stopped the key switches going back to default, which is the first one in line. How can I keep the last choice? All right, so let's give it a quick try here. And I think that there might have been changes with this from like 12 from the initial release to the new version, the updated version. So if you haven't updated, all right, so let me just add. Move a cable off of my controller here. All right, let me catch my key switch here. All right, so. Okay. All right, so let's say if I'm here, I'll just record. Sorry, just get a stuck MIDI note there. Let me just reset that. All right, so let me just come right over here. So let's say we're going to have our, let me just open up. Let's see if I may have to re-record that. So I didn't have the key switches, but let's see if it's captured. All right, let me just re-record and do some key switches. Now I have the expression map open. Okay, so now let's take a look at, we have our key switches that are recorded in here. So we'll make this a little larger and easier to see. All right, so let's say we have so that seems to be kind of, let's say if we go back to the beginning of our piece here. Let's see, we have so let's say if we come back here. So we can see that that is chasing. So make sure that you have like 12. I think some of the behavior may have changed in 12.01 version, but that seems to be kind of functioning as expected here. Let me know if I'm doing anything differently than you are. All right. So we see non-delusional just saying, "What's up, Cubase users?" All right. And hope that everyone is well. All right, so we see from Flyvy says, yeah, the template just deletes itself. So, see if you're not saving it to a different, if you have a unique name, maybe. But, let me know if you're, maybe saving with the same name or something like that. But, and you could also just kind of, if you go to like, if you have any templates, so let's say if we come over here, let's go to our hub. So we'll just say, okay, come here. A lot of times you could just right click and say show in Explorer or show in Finder, and that will take you directly to where that particular template is. And make sure it's like on the system there. And sometimes if you don't see the templates, it could also indicate, I think if we go to Media Bay, we come over to user content, I think that you will see a project templates here. You could always try to rescan the disk and see. So you can see the Flyvy marker color template that we just saw there. So under the user content, you should see project templates listed there as well. All right, so we see from MGLax35 just says, thanks, Greg. So we see non-delusional says, anyone else here from New England area? So usually we have Lawrence from Barn Door Recording, who's in Rhode Island as well. He usually shows up maybe a little later on Friday afternoons. All right, Giorgio Phoenix says, hi, Greg, greetings from Bogota, Colombia. I wanted to ask, how can I change the EQ from channel strip? Can set up as post instead of pre. All right, so when we come over here, so let's say we have our channel strip. So if you want, like the channel strip is, generally, so if you wanted this same EQ, so if we, wanted to change the position within the particular channel strip of the EQ, we could move that, and that may not make it pre or post fader. This same EQ here is when we come over to our EQ, we could run this as a standard plugin as well. It's called Studio EQ. And if we wanted to right click here, we could just say, okay, let's go, and we could move it as pre-fader or post-fader. We could move it to a pre-fader or post-fader slot where we see this green line. And this green line, we could manually adjust how many pre and post fader slots. So if you need the EQ to be post fader, The channel EQ will do this. You could also, if this makes any difference, we could change the signal flow order so that this EQ comes before the inserts. But if you need it to be strictly post fader, just come right over here and you could just add that insert, the studio EQ insert, in a post fader slot if you need to. All right, great to see Sable Winters on from Bay Area, California. See, Non-Delusional says he loves the vocal chain plugin. It's a pretty great plugin for having everything in one particular spot. All right, so we see from Omar Cacao, it says, hi Greg, Cubase 15 Pro Mac. When I record a VST channel, all MIDI notes are always before the grid, and I have to activate latency compensation every time. So you can, so if you could let us know which particular audio interface it is, but generally when you come here to your studio setup, try just coming over here and you may see like an advanced options. Make sure that you have the adjust for record latency activated and checked there. So that should automatically do it. Sometimes on Windows, until just like last week or 2 weeks ago, Microsoft just did a big round of MIDI improvements with the latest Windows 11 version, which is like really exciting. So finally we could do MIDI 2.0 stuff, and I had MIDI interfaces on my Windows 11 system that just kind of weren't working in Windows 11. It just magically started to work and worked great. I was just about ready to buy a new MIDI interface. So on a Windows platform, there could be different drivers for different MIDI interfaces, and some of those could be off. We generally don't run into that on we generally don't run into that on Mac because it's kind of part of the operating system, but just check for the adjust for record latency. And also if you have like, a lot of plugins, it could be, that. So I would try that. If you have to do this, you could try recording, with the constrained delay compensation on if you have a lot of plugins and those plugins are causing latency as well. All right. Okay, so you just see from Non-Delusional says, I think that has EMS, that has something to do with pre-roll, I guess. So let me know if I'm missing an earlier part of a question or comment. All right. Everyone's happy that Sable is on. All right, so we have John Barry just checking in from the English Riviera in South Devon, England. So John, I was playing around. I know you had a question last week about the how to like bypass multiple plugins using Q-Link. So I wanted to show you something I came up with. It's a little bit of a workaround, but I think may be helpful. So let's say we have a number of insert effects here. So let's say my graphic EQ. And what John wanted to do on Tuesday's live stream was to do kind of a quick link to bypass, and now it's to disable particular plugins, but we need to, we enable quick link by holding down Alt or Option plus Shift, but we also need the Alt or Option plus Shift we need the Alt key to bypass, to disable the plugins versus bypassing. So I found, John, that what you could do is just come over here. So let's say we have all these plugins on the same slot. If you just kind of click like 3 times on this plugin So if you open up the plugin itself, if we watch the behavior, I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option plus the Shift key and go to the particular plugin. And then we could just say, okay, once we're here, so we could select those particular tracks. Let's open up, let's say I turn this one off and do it kind of a couple of times. And then so once we go to like kind of the graphic, let's say we load up a plugin here. Let's go to filter. So let me just add this plugin to multiple tracks. So try coming over here, and if you open it up, try just clicking the off button a couple of times, and then with Alt plus Shift, and then that could take care of it for you. So once we have, let's see if I have my Q-Link active. So then you could disable multiple plugins all at once. So give that a try. I know it's kind of a workaround, but it's better than doing it for multiple tracks, multiple plugin instances, instead of doing them all kind of at once. So thanks for joining us, John. Hope you're well. Okay, just reading through comments. All right, and we see Michael Teams is granted John Barry 1 gallon of amaretto chocolate ice cream. Sable Winters asks, does Steinberg have a great Hammond B3 instrument? So yeah, it's part of Hallion, or if you have the Hallion Sonic collection. So if we come over here, let's say I'm going to run it in Hallion Sonic. I'm not a great piano player, but if we come over here, we can just kind of scroll down. You'll see Model C. So if you want to come over here, and so all of your drawbars. So part of Hallion is to actually have kind of a tone wheel organ. So if you wanted to kind of come over here, and then you're going to have, the rotary speaker as well, which you could set up, as well as an amplifier section. So if you want to go all John Lord on it, and different effects. So you say, okay, let's just put or if you want more kind of classic jazz. So I'll just make this a little louder so you can probably hear it a little better. So check out the Model C. It's a great instrument. So you get that with Hallion Sonic collection, or if you have Hallion, it's one of the included instruments. But there's a dedicated kind of organ oscillator that's part of Hallion itself, so you could design your own organ instruments. All right, so we see 54 beat maker says I can't find a way to mute the way muted, or I can't find a way to change the way muted events look color-wise. Please help. So I don't think it's really. It used to be gray, but then people would have gray events and would complain that they couldn't distinguish between non-muted or muted and grayed events. So, but we could do a little bit of tweaking. So let's say if I have a few files here, I want to just grab. So let's say if I grab the X key, we can see that those are muted. But I think if we want to go into some of the settings, you could adjust kind of the transparency. So let's say if we come over here to event display, so let's say we want to adjust like the event opacity. I think if you could make it a little grayer if you wanted to adjust so they're not so bright, but generally there were lots of complaints before that people couldn't distinguish between a gray event and a muted event. So that's why they kind of made it a bit more obvious when events were muted. So try playing around. If you come over here to the preferences to editors or under event display, to the event opacity. So some people like that, like don't want to see anything. So you can see kind of more of the event like that. So. All right, so we see from Simon Sedgwick says I'm having similar problems with key switches in the latest Cubase 15 on PC. Also, sustain pedal randomly will record. I normally find I have to have viewed controller 64 in CC data, and then it'll work. So let me know if it's an expression map that is. Like if it's with particular instruments, because maybe the expression map isn't set up correctly, or if you just generate the expression map in like a Hallian-based instrument, if you have the same behavior. So if you can let me know that, or if it's just like a expression map that was kind of user-made, it might be some issues with the particular expression map design and creation. And if you want to send me a file, you could send it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, or if you have a project where that's happened on. Okay, so we see from Vince about the colors of the marker window in the template. Says, okay, now I got it popping up. Okay. Giorgio Phoenix says, thank you. So Louis Conger says you should have those live speaking Spanish to support Latin. Yeah, unfortunately, I only have a couple of years of high school Spanish, so you could mention it to Steinberg. I think you can have translations set up on the particular on the live stream, so at least closed captioning. And I think YouTube is rolling out where it might be able to do real-time translations. I'm not sure if it's fully supported or how that's working, but I could do some more research on it. But I'll pass it along to the Steinberg team. Unfortunately, I just work for the Steinberg distributor now, so I don't actually work for Steinberg, but I'll mention that people are seeking kind of a Spanish version of this. Okay, Sorry, my chat field jumped. Okay, so we have from Music Magic's Musicians asks, in the big session, I'm finding it hard to navigate from the output bus. For example, if I click on the bus or output channel using Shift, it will highlight the corresponding group bus. Any workflow? So let's say if we have, I'll just open up kind of a large project here. Let's say we'll do this one. Okay, so let's say there was no way we could know. Will we ever understand the way that things would go? All right, so lots and lots of tracks. So let's say if we're here. Can you feel it now? Was it meant to be? Or will the memories all fade in time? Now that we've been apart, do you feel it in your heart? All right, so in this particular track, when I open up, so if I understand this correctly, it says to navigate from the output bus. For example, if I click on the bus or output channel using Shift, it'll highlight the corresponding group bus, any workflow. So if I'm here in my, let's say I'm in my master fader, so I have 13 sources. So in this, I think we have all the channels going to groups. So if I click just to where I can see we have 13 sources feeding this particular channel. So if I click right here, I can say, okay, let's go to my bass. I want to, so now we can say our bass is going to our stereo output. Now if I activate this, I could just click right here, and now I could see that we are at our stereo output. And let me just come over here. Let's look at our sources. Let's say, okay, now I want to go to my percussion group. So now my percussion group is here, but let's see what is feeding into our percussion group. Okay, so I have the shaker, a bata, conga, ripinike, comp, and talk drum. So now if I come over here, we can say, okay, this is going to my percussion group. The percussion group is being routed to my main output. So make sure that you take advantage for navigation. If this is kind of what your question's entailing, and if I'm misunderstanding the question, please let me know. But here, this is where I'm at, and I can see all the sources that are feeding. So let's say, okay, I want to go to my keyboards. Now we have 4 sources that are feeding the keyboard group. What are those? I want my piano, bells, strings, or pad chops. So I can say, okay, let's go to my piano track. And then I can say, okay, now I want to go to the groups. This group is the keyboard group. And now if we have this activated, anytime that we go to a particular source, I could see kind of the full output chain. So let's say, okay, we have my piano. So we click on this icon and see this is going into this, my keyboards group. My keyboards group is going to the stereo out. So you could kind of navigate pretty quickly from the main stereo out. So let me know if that's helpful or if I'm misunderstanding. Great. All right, so we see Val just mentioning since this Windows 11, my Apollo appears to be a MIDI output device, which it isn't, and nothing. If I select it, it's a funny bug. It could be that part of maybe how it communicates to get updates might be over MIDI for some parameters. So maybe you can't really access it, but it still may have a internal MIDI port that is kind of referenced in the driver. So, all right, so we have Steve Leeds checking in from San Francisco Bay Area. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you're well. All right, we see Jan from Cubase Index from Stockholm. Thanks for joining us, being part of the community, and for all your efforts with the Cubase Index site. So we see from Vince, it says, yeah, my project template's in a folder with the one showing up, but it isn't. So, try coming, let me know if it's in a folder in like Explorer or Finder. But if we come over here, see if it's going into Media Bay, and then, try again going to, if you see it here, just go to your project templates. You could right click and rescan. If it's not showing up in the hub, you could also come over here and make sure that you don't have just you can see this little icon here. That way we could differentiate between user templates, factory templates, or all. So if you make a template and it's not showing up here, just make sure that this isn't set to filter out user templates and show only factory templates from that little drop down. Okay, so we see from Vince's rename makes it show up. So all right, so we see from Rob Schmedeke says, hi Greg, after I've detected the tempo of a file, I set the definition from tempo. I then use spectral layers to separate stems from the tempo detector file. Does not sync anymore with the tempo. Is there a series of steps I'm missing to retain the tempo? Okay, so let's do just a quick short example of this. See if we get. Make sure it's something I can play without YouTube strikes. Okay, so let's come over here. So we do my tempo detection here. Alright, so let's see. Alright, so let's come right over here. Let me just put in. All right, now let's do our separation. Sorry, this may take a minute, but we'll just make sure we go through all of the process here. All right, give it a minute or two here for it to do its magic. Okay, so I haven't done the set definition from tempo yet, so I'm not sure if the step is necessary. But we'll let it do its unmixing here. All right, so we see Jan wishing happy Friday to Sable Winters. See Michael Marshall sending greetings from Somerset in the UK. See Mark Raven just sending a thank you message to Jan for the Cubase Index. We're just about a third of the way done, a little under 2 minutes. All right, we have Balsa saying hi from Montenegro. And Michael Teams is granted Jan 1 gallon of coconut almond praline ice cream. All right, got about a minute, 20 seconds left. As you just mentioned, he's been addicted to music since 1965. Okay, we're about a minute, 9 seconds. All right, getting there, about 39 seconds left here. Less than 30 seconds. All right, 5 seconds. All right, just about done. All right, so now we're going to play it. It's kind of unmixed. So I didn't need to do a I didn't need to do the set definition to tempo if I don't intend to really change that tempo. So let's say I'm going to drag my vocals out. And let me just move that over.
Band, just the way it seems to be. Now the eyes in empty arms, a place to wait for me. Let's check the scene now.
So if I just
What it seems to be, and I thought that I was dreaming when I thought I heard you say, mirror, mirror, who is the fool on the wall? Mirror, mirror, really don't know you at all. Sad.
So it seems like that's still working for me. So I didn't, if I was going to now change the tempo afterwards, let's see if we now come over here and I set these to so I'm not sure if you need to change the tempo afterwards or if you just need to do the tempo detection and then spectral layers. But let's say if I come now and I may have to let's select this and I will come over to our tempo track to advanced and set definition from tempo. All right, so say if I come here. So even now, just doing the set definition from tempo. So even after doing the unmixing and doing the set definition from tempo, you see that it followed the tempo changes still. If I did the set definition from tempo and changed the tempo, that persisted throughout the versions as well. So let me know if I did anything differently than you or if I misunderstood. But just let me know. I'll leave this project kind of open and we'll move on so we can go back to it if we need to, so I won't have to unmix it again. All right, so we see Vince is asking, what are some tricks at the start of a song? I guess setting your BPM. That's always a good idea to have an initial idea. It used to be that you would, like when recording to tape, that you would have to have your definition and your tempo defined. We can obviously be a little more flexible with that using programs like Cubase, where we have a tremendous amount of flexibility of being able to take a performance and change the tempo, just like what we saw. But think of, like what the intention of the project is. A lot of people miss that. It's like, why am I writing a song? What do I have to say? What do I want to accomplish with this? Sometimes people, I know a lot of songwriters and they just have to write and they're just constantly writing. And I have like such respect that, they have to capture all of their ideas. And imagine if how many amazing pieces were just lost to all of time because no one had the ability of capturing. Bach probably wrote, another 50,000 pieces they just didn't bother to write down. And the same with any great composer or, how many, amazing songs from, there's probably hundreds of Beatles songs that they just forgot and they didn't have a tape recorder that could have been just amazing gems. But if they didn't remember it, they didn't think it was good enough just because people didn't have a way of capturing. So I think the first thing when starting a song is just to make sure that you're capturing your ideas in a quick, unobtrusive way. So, one piece of advice I give you when recording is always just hit record, because you can always capture magic. And a lot of people, you don't want to have the technology of, the medium of recording be a hindrance to your creative process. So always be just in record. And if you don't like something, you could erase it. But if you missed capturing like the greatest idea, that's always a shame when you could just hit one button. And hard drives are inexpensive. All right, White Whistle Bondrude asks, what's the most practical way to lower the volume using automation? I'm new to automation and want to learn how to use it efficiently. I'd like to drop the volume instantly rather than gradually. Okay, so let's just pop over to... Okay, so let's say we have this particular project here, so just open up. All right, so we want to look at some automation. So when I just come right over here, we could have, like a couple of, ways when we are just kind of drawing in automation. So we could choose to, if I want to, just click, we could add different automation nodes. One quick way, if you want to do just a quick drop, is just to use the range tool. And then if we go to like the upper center, I'll make this a little larger here. So let's say we grab this range and I want this range to be softer or louder. You could just kind of come right there and just say, oh, this one word, I want to bring that down or bring it up in volume. So you could do that quite easily, just kind of coming right over here and being able to just, okay, this is a little loud or a little soft. And if you want to put in, you can say, okay, from here to here, I want to do a fade out. You could just simply do a fade. We could go to the center area and adjust kind of the curve. So if you want a Bezier curve, you could do that. We could also just come right over here and just drop a particular region. And that way, like as we listen to this, you would just see the fader kind of automatically on this track. If we look at the fader here, and just see kind of all those automation changes automatically reflected. So you could try using, and if you want to lock the automation, you could just come over here, and that way you don't accidentally kind of click and overwrite existing automation like that. And then there's different line tools that you could use. So if you want those to be the same, if you want to switch to, like maybe if you're doing more electronic music, you could just come over here and do different kind of curves and say, okay, I want to take this and I want to now, change the frequency of that. So all sorts of great stuff you could do with automation. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Say Mark Rabin has received 1 gallon of banana moon pie ice cream from Michael Teams. Okay, sorry, my chat field jumped. Let me find my spot. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my spot. All right, so I think I'm close. All right, so we see from Balsa who asks, can all effects and parameters in channel strip be linked between 2 or more tracks? All right, let's give it a shot. Okay, so let's come over here. I'm going to select these 3 tracks. Let's get to, let's see, our channel strip. I'm going to activate in the mixer just by holding down Alt or Option plus Shift, and we'll see if that carries over. So we go. So let me just make sure all these are selected. I want to add a compressor, so let's go to my standard compressor. Let's come over. And now when we go to so we can see that when we look at these particular tracks, that all of those tracks, just by using Q-Link, when we look at it, now I'll go to the next channel, that all of those settings, so I select all 3 tracks. So again, all 3 tracks will be selected here. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option plus Shift and say, okay, now I want to add a magneto to the tracks. I'll adjust the parameters of the magneto. So now let's open up each of the tracks and we can see that the magneto is added. I'll close that track. Let's open up this track. We see the magneto has been added. And we open up this track. So all you have to do is, again, select multiple tracks, hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, and make changes. So if I change one, we can see that they'll all change. I adjust my panning, they'll all adjust. If I want to, go into my channel strip, we can now add, let's say, an envelope shaper to all of the tracks. So regardless of where I'm at, we could just come right over here and make changes apply across multiple tracks using the Q-Link. see Jazz Dude sharing a link to 60s music documented on German TV. That's primarily all live concerts, live performances. All right, so we see from Costas Rices, says hello from Greece. Thanks for joining us. Setting my control room F4 in an older project in the output section. I disable the outputs and keep them on in the control room section, but I don't have sound. Windows 10, Cubase 13. All right, so let's say if we have a project going on here. And if you have multiple tracks going on simultaneously, I'll just revert this since I probably destroyed my good friend Clay Oswald's project. All right, so a couple things that could often kind of happen in the control room. You make sure that, all right, because you could have 4 different speakers. So make sure you don't have it set to a speaker that's not connected. So right now, when I go to my audio connections and I go to my control room, like if I have multiple speakers, I only have speakers A connected, and none of these are defined currently. But in my personal studio, I have like 5.1 and surround, so make sure that you have the correct speakers. Now it's also easy to set up where you're monitoring for like a Q mix. So if you have this set up, like you could switch between different Q mixes or an external device that's connected. So if you have like music coming from an Amazon Echo or an iPad, as a quick reference, and make sure that this is set to mix. So if we come over here, also, could be that, make sure that your volume is up in the control room. Make sure that you're not accidentally monitoring on the headphones, because you could have a separate bus just for monitoring the headphones as well. But, check those particular things and make sure, because if one of these is, and also it could be the dim is turned on and you could set the dim amount. So if we come over here, so let's say, okay, we go to listen dim. That you could maybe not be hearing it if your dim is set up. So check a couple of those things. So make sure that it's set to mix here. Okay. And check to make sure that you have it in the monitor. So give that a try. And let me know if you want to send a screenshot to me at clubcubase at steinberg.de of your control room and your routing. So if I could see like this information in your setup, then I could probably give you some more insight. Let me know if you set the same on the outputs here of your control room. And sometimes people will set up the control room and it's, easy to come over here and maybe to have control room disabled accidentally. So make sure that the control room is turned on. But if you want to send me a screenshot of your audio connections in the control room tab and your current control room settings like that, I'd be happy to take a look at it. And we could probably, if you send it soon, I could maybe take a look at it like during the live stream. But you can send it to clubcubase at steinberg.de. So Gareth says he's turning into Roy Batty in All This Rain. All right, so we see UK Leonard Sants. Hi, Greg. I'm working with Groove Agent, and I would like to know how to have its output in a single individual track, kick, snare, hi-hat, etc., but as MIDI track, not as individual instrument track. Okay, so let's say we'll do new project here. Okay. Okay, so let's say I'm going to add an instrument rack. So come over here, let's add an instrument rack, and we'll say, okay, let's go to Groove Agent SE. We're going to create a MIDI track that's routed to it. Okay, so let's come over and say, okay, now I have a MIDI track here. Okay, so I want to, let's go to my Groove Agent. I'll make a drum map from it. So now we double click. So let's say I want to put kick here. So I'm going to add a MIDI track, and we're going to make sure that the MIDI output is connected to, let's say when we come over here to plugins, to Groove Agent. And let's say I want to come here, and again, we can okay, so let's put in like snares. And let's add another MIDI track. So I have my kick here. Snare. And let's just throw in some hi-hat. So I'll add another MIDI track. We're going to route this to Groove Agent. And again, I'll just come over here. Let's switch this to my drum editor. All right, so now everything is going into our mix console. We're going to have our MIDI tracks that we see here. So I have my MIDI volume here, but if I now want to go to the original Groove Agent track, so I could see the audio, if I want to take the kick, snare, and hi-hat out to different audio sources, I could come over here. So let's say, okay, I want to take this kick. Let's route it to plug-in outputs. I want to send that to output 2. Let's take my snare, and we'll see just in the outputs. Output 3, and my hi-hat. Let's put it in output 4. So now I have my MIDI volumes here, and I could say, okay, I want my kick and snare to be softer than the hi-hat here. So it's MIDI tracks that are all going to one rack instrument, so they could be on different tracks. So kick, snare, hi-hat. So when you add a MIDI track, once the instrument is existing, so add a MIDI track, the MIDI output routed under plugins to Groove Agent. So we could have kick, snare, hi-hat, all your individual sounds on different sources. And then if you want to split the audio to discrete outputs, we just need to go to the particular instrument here and say, okay, now we have Groove Agent. We could just kind of open that up and select the sound and set it to different routing. So let me know if that's helpful for you. And if you wanted to do it all in a single track, all you'd have to do is come over here and just say, okay, let's put snare 2, and let's say our hi-hat. So if I mute these, now we could have multiple tracks all coming from one instance, one track, but the multiple outputs when we look at it in the mix console. So let me know if that makes sense, if that's helpful for you. All right, so we see from Michael Teams, set up a new computer as a backup and have space how to get the cursor to go back to your starting point when you stop. Thanks, Greg. This is one of those things that was hidden, and then they made it obvious, and then everyone has a hard time finding it in the obvious place. So there's a start mode. If you go to the transport menu, so let's say if I come right over here and I want this to start right here, and so when I hit stop, right now it currently stops in its existing spot, but if I want it to return, we would go to, again, your transport mode to start mode, and we activate, just place a check on return to start position on stop. So now when I stop, it's going to go right directly to where we were before. So again, transport menu, start mode, return to start position on stop. All right, you see Gareth is surviving lots of rain. Yeah, we were going to go to Portugal on our spring break trip, but it seems like they had a lot of flooding recently. All right, so we see it says my key commands always start as no preset, not the only one I've made. So generally when you go to like the key commands preset, it may, like, even if you it kind of shows when you go to presets here that you could load presets, but it may not reflect the particular keyboard preset that you're currently on. So it could be on your current preset, but it may just say no preset here because it is kind of the active preset. So it doesn't reflect what is the current preset that's being used, but it will show you presets that you could load up. So, and generally the keyboard presets will automatically kind of persist from the next time you open it, so you don't have to, but that allows you to kind of choose a new preset. And doesn't indicate what preset you're currently on. All right, so we see from Vince, just says I have no control over save as template either. Yeah, so if you want to send a screenshot to me, like when you try to save as a template. So if I again come over here, let's say we go to and it could be maybe just what is currently selected. So let's say, if I have, let's say, a MIDI part, if we see save as template, so it may be like a focus issue. So let's say if maybe if we had like our mixer open, and that's the active window, but it looks like, so check just to make sure it's not like an area, like a focus, like if you click on the main project window, if that changes, if you don't see the save as template. So all right, Tommy Valen asks, hi Greg, I have an external sound module connected to Cubase 15. How can I easily select MBS and LBS in the program change to enter correct sound from the sound module? So I guess it's the MSB, LSB. So a lot of times you may have to like go into, let's go into like a MIDI event here. So a lot of different sound modules may have a script. So if you wanted to come over here, we could say, let's see if I have one I'll just add a MIDI track here. So if we just say, okay, I want to go to, so let's say if I go to my MIDI device manager. So let's say, okay, I have a Yamaha or a Chord M1. So I'm going to, let's say, install the device. So let's say, okay, I connect my D50 here. So we can say, okay, here's my D50. It is connected to this particular that particular MIDI port, and when I go to add a MIDI track, we could just choose our outputs. And we go to the MIDI devices, and we can see, okay, here's my D50. So if I wanted to now come over here, I could see all of the patch banks, so you could do that. If you need to kind of manually set it up, you could go into the list editor. So if we now come right over here, we could say, okay, let's go to our list editor, and then we could just kind of come right over here and we could insert different events. So you could say, okay, I want this to be your controller. So let's say if we choose for this to be a controller, as we enter in, I thought we could just enter in. Okay, so say if I come here, okay, now we come here. So let's say we want to insert, this is where it is, your controller, and then you could say, okay, I want this to be CC0 followed by 60 something. And you could just kind of put in the LSB, MSB in here. Let me just. Oh, CC32. So you could just kind of enter in the particular values here. But if you could find there's a script, if you could find a script for it, then you could just simply do all the patch banks and have that kind of taken care of with the script. And you can make a script in the MIDI device manager as well. So if you're looking for a, see if your external sound module has a script, and then that could make it much easier for you to work with. Okay. Gareth is saying he's new here due to his memory. All right. Everyone got their past history questions kind of eradicated with the name change. So. All right, so we have keyboard guy joining from Chesapeake Beach, Maryland. So it's great to be back in Cubase Hangout. So probably not far from me. All right, so we see from Cabello Playmaster says, "Hi guys, great place to gain some knowledge and skills. Thank you, Playmaster from South Africa." Okay, so we see from Eddie Brophy says, "Hi, well, thank you very much for the direction regarding audio dropouts and clicks and your advice regarding latency mod. The response I got from the now installed was shocking, big red words." All right, so hopefully, you figure out what component is causing dropouts for you. Michael Teams has granted my family and I 1 gallon of fresh blackberries and cream ice cream. Sounds good. My son will probably eat it all. Gareth says, "I have tons of dairy produce from Michael Teams." So we see, "Hi Greg, question, is it possible to import, let's say, 10 audio files into Nuendo 14 and automatically locate them on separate tracks arranged after each other in stairs form?" I think we could probably do it with a macro. So let's see if we could make a macro to do that. So we'll just do new project. Okay, so let me just import some audio files here quickly. Okay, so let's say I want to take, these files are all on, we'll say, one track. Okay, so let's say we want to basically, I think we could do this in a macro. So let's say we have this event selected. We want to let's say all right, so let's go to our key commands and work on a macro. I think we could do this, not too hateful. All right, so let's there's a couple approaches I'm thinking of we could do. All right, so All right, let's try this path. So I want to let me try a different approach to it. All right, so we have this. So I want to let's move our cursor to the end of this event. All right, so let's say if I'm here, all right, so let's start building a macro. Okay, so I want to navigate right. Let's add that command. Okay, so if I'm here, now we want cursor to beginning of event. All right, so let's say if I'm here, let's try this. All right, so we want to kind of select the next event. All right, let me just set, let's say, locators to selection. Okay, so if I'm here, let's take this and all right, so it seems like I should have the come here. Let's set our left and right locators. Okay, let me just get rid of this. Okay, so basically we're going to navigate to the right, select all. Okay, now let's see what happens when we duplicate the track. Right, we want to navigate down. All right, so let's say we have this one selected. All right, and then we want to navigate left. Let's add that command. All right. Okay, so I think we might be getting closer. So let's see if we do this. Okay, let's say before we navigate down, because we want this to be gone. All right. Just drag these over so they're not overlapping. Okay. Sorry, it's taking a little bit. All right, so let's see. If we come here, we have this selected. Now we want to, we'll navigate up. Then we will delete. Then navigate down. All right, so let's take a look. If we did this right, let's remove this track. So let's say we have this track selected. I have my left and right locators elsewhere. Now we could try running the macro here. Okay, so we want to, when we navigate up, we want to select from cursor to end. Okay. All right, let me just see. If we go into visibility, okay, so we want to. All right. See what this does. There's probably a simpler way to do this. Maybe I'll work on some more. All right, I'll take one more quick stab at it. I don't want to spend so much time on it, but I could have this dialed in for Tuesday's live stream. So let's see what happens if we just remove that delete. I will see if I could get it dialed in, or if we have time at the end, I could come back to this. But I'm pretty sure I could get a macro dialed in to do that. Let me just. So I think we're pretty close to it, but I don't want to. So if we have time at the end, I'll see if I could revisit it. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But if you want to email me, I could. If I have the when I get the macro figured out, I could send it to you. Sorry about that. All right. All right, so we see Sable just says finally installed Cubase 15 Pro last night after a few months upgrade. Congratulations, enjoyed the new version. Okay, reading through comments. Sorry, my chat field jumped on me. Find my spot. Okay, sorry, I think I'm where I was. Okay. You see Mark Raven just expressing gratitude to the live stream community. Okay. Okay, reading through comments still. All right, so we see from DKS8X, it says, quick tutorial on how to mix and master, please. There's not really, if I had to give some points that a lot of people probably mess up on, there's not, every song is going to present kind of different, different, situations. There's, but one thing I could do, like if you don't have like the best room, if it's not treated, the one thing I learned this from Elliot Shiner, I would say use less effects, use less plugins, try to get the balance right without having to use lots of plugins. But one tip that I learned from Elliot Shiner, who's an amazing, probably like the most highly respected mix engineer in the world, is when I watch him mix, he mixes very, very quiet, kind of like this loud, maybe even softer, and he's listening for, can I hear the vocal, can I hear the snare drum at this level? And then he finds that when he mixes, and I think that when you actually find that when you mix at very low volumes, it's really easy for stuff to sound great when it's kind of cranked up. But if it's still like, I think that you have to really actively listen when you're mixing at low monitoring levels. And that kind of engages your brain to pay more attention to everything that's going on. And that when you actually need to turn it up for the client, that stuff will translate very well if it's translating at low volumes. So where I see a lot of people kind of going wrong in their mix is when they are using plugins for everything, so that, like where they're putting a compressor on a track for one word, and they don't think that compressor is affecting every other word, and they have another compressor for a different word. So I think having very simple signal paths, kind of getting the level, and a lot of mixing is also going to be the arrangement. So don't assume, if your mix sounds bad, you sometimes have to figure out what the actual problem of the mix is. Is it an arrangement? So like, do you have a piano that's playing really low notes that's conflicting with the bass, and there's a lot of like low end energy on a guitar amp, and those three things are conflicting, but people think it's the bass that sounds bad, and it's maybe not the bass. So figure out like the arrangement and if you listen to a lot of great recordings, it's, a lot of the things that we cherish as a mix is a great arrangement that's not conflicting musically or sonically with the other instruments. And when you do mastering, don't try to push it so much. I see people put, 20 plugins on like a mastering session, and again, I think you get a lot more clarity using less processing in general. So, but if you have like a particular project that you'd like me to show in a mix, please feel free to share it, and I'd be happy to kind of do a quick, this is how I would approach it. I'm not a professional mix engineer by any means, but we could do that if someone wants to share a project, that we could take a look at how to mix like that particular scenario. But also don't think of, like one solution is going to fix the problem for every song. Jean-Marie Horvat, who's often on these live streams, He just won a Grammy for Best R&B Production, and now everyone just wants him to give him like his templates of how he did the vocal, and he's just like, it's not going to work because every song is different. The key of this vocal, the EQ is not going to work for your song. The timing won't work with the compressor release. So instead of thinking about, getting approach each song as a fresh, unique challenge when you're mixing, instead of using kind of someone else's presets to kind of try to do the work for you. So, all right. See that Sable Winters used to sit on the roof of her house with a 6-pack of beer watching the tornado before jumping off into the shelter. It's a fun game in West Texas. I missed that growing up in Virginia. All right. All right, we see David M. joining from Liverpool. Thanks for joining. You're just outside of Liverpool. All right, Steve Green just asked, hi, Greg, I have several inserts on an event. Is it possible to add different automation to all the different inserts, have rotary effect organ for 2 bars, have reverb for 4 bars, etc.? Yeah, certainly. So let's say if I want to go to this vocal here. So let's say I just want to throw on So let's say I want to automate like this. All right, so let's say I want to come here. So I'm just turning off the delay. So now if I want to come over there, we can see that my delay turning off and on. And let's say I just want to grab my EQ. So all I had to do now is just and now we go back and all those changes. So we come back here and so we have our delays, our EQs, our filters all going on so simultaneously. So you could do it all on top of each other or just at different times of the song, whatever is appropriate for that. All right. All right, wonderful to see Pablo on from Galicia, España. So I know Pablo had a question last week about WaveLab, or on Tuesday, WaveLab with rendering files independently from like a montage. So I figured it out. So before I forget, let's go ahead and show that in WaveLab 13. Okay, so let's say I have my montage and we're all kind of set with my montage here. So let's say as we want to work on this, I'm just going to go to, first off, an album. So I have songs in my montage here, and the question was, how do we render these independently? So as we come over here, let's go ahead and let's go to, we can go to our render tab, or just go to export, and we want to choose multi. And at this point, we want to just say we want active and audio files. Let's say we just have our montage, and we're going to choose all titles. Okay, we could include the master section or bypass it. If I set this up right. All right, let me just go back to our edit. So when I have this, let's go to our album wizard here. And I'm just going to go to the album wizard so we have the markers. Okay, so now we have, let's say, our markers in our montage. Everything is happy with that. So let's come over. And now we do our export. So we're going to choose, for multiple outputs, we want to choose all titles. We're going to put this into a folder on our desktop. So we'll just come over here. Let's empty out this particular folder. So we'll call it our POBs here. All right, so we have an empty folder here. All right, so now I'm going to say, so the trick is, I think we want to just choose all titles, and we'll say start. And now we can see that we have the individual files. We have our montage here, and we have the individual files all rendered out. We go back to our Explorer, and we can see that our tracks are automatically put directly into the folder that we defined in the export. So when you go to export multi, you want to just say active file group audio files. And here what you could choose is, once we're kind of doing, you want to just to choose the different titles. So, and we'll do this from, let me just go back to the edit. I'm going to select the montage here. So now we'll get our different choices. So export and choose under multiple outputs, all titles. And then once you do that, that will automatically populate the particular files, and they'll all be rendered so that we can see track 2, track 3, track 4, 5, and 6 will automatically open. So sorry, I was having brain cramp on that the other day. All right, so let's jump back. Let me exit out. And we had another question while I'm in WaveLab of someone says that they're having problems with their CC121 controlling the transport in WaveLab 12. So I'm going to open up WaveLab 12. All right, so let's say if I want to come over here to my WaveLab 12, and let's go to let's say to this track here. All right, so when we want to use kind of remote control devices, and I'll just Cubase open. Let me just turn that. So when we're in WaveLab to set up remote control devices, what we wanted to do is you go to preferences and then remote devices. So we want to choose MIDI control device 1, and we want to choose, make sure that you have the CC121 as the input and output port. And you could come over here and just kind of change different aspects if you want to remap stuff. But now when I come over here to edit and I hit play on my CC121, Or if I control the fader, that would be our master section laid out for us. So if I want to fast forward, so we can just kind of come directly over here, controller transport and master fader and different kind of plug-in controls. But make sure that you go to the file menu, to preferences, to remote devices, that you had to CC121, and I think it needs to be MIDI control device 1, and then that should pretty much automatically work for you with that. All right, let me jump back to some live questions. It's great to see you on, Pablo. Great. All right, so we see, hi, I have a question. Is there some way to reverse the points of automation, like doing mirror automation for panning? Let's see if we can maybe do it in a Project Logical Editor. I'm not sure if we can. But let's say if I have, all right, let's just do panning automation here. All right, so let's say I'll just take this and get into automate.
When I played Hey Jude, I should have told you you were out of tune. Whatever you did, that was okay. Up until now.
All right, so we have pan automation going on.
Okay. Suddenly it's Beatles or Stones. Something about that just sounds so wrong.
So I'm not sure if there's like an inversion, but we'll give it a shot, see if we can do it in. So let's say if we have these events, selected here. I'm not sure if we can, but I think trim's gonna just set it down. Yeah, I don't think that there's like an invert. Let me see. So if we have automation, we may be able to kind of just kind of tilt by grabbing kind of the upper corners. So let's say if I want to tilt the corners, so depending on the automation, you may be able to just kind of tilt like that. So if we have, let's say, all of our automation data here, you might be able to, it's not inverting necessarily, but you might be able to, with panning, to be able to control it with tilting. But I don't know of kind of an automatic way of inverting the particular values. And it could depend on different, like inverting volume versus panning could be different for that. I'll see if I can play around with it and come up with something, but I don't think like we could usually manipulate different aspects with the Project Logical Editor, but I see that with automation, like we could trim it, we could adjust the position, We could change stuff on the tracks. Change the color, but it's probably not going to help. So if I come here, like I know we could do it with some MIDI data on some events, like for MIDI notes, but I don't know why doing it for automation values. But you could try just grabbing, if it's something like this, maybe you could just grab the upper handles and be able to kind of get something similar pretty quickly. All right, so we see from Katsuresis Races, thank you, my friend. I wish you all the best and keep enlightening us. All right. Let's see. Mark Raven says, Greg, I owe you an apology. I asked about guests at Zoom and then flake totally. Life stuff. I hope it went well. Wanted to be there. Yeah, so David was great. We're sorry we didn't get a chance to see you and Stella, but it was just, David shared a lot of wonderful information. So, but I'll try to get some more lined up, maybe for April's, maybe doing a vacation in March, but maybe we get it set up for April to have another special guest. Have a couple people in mind. See who calls, who owes me a favor. But thanks for inspiring us to get a guest. Look forward to seeing you on the next Zoom. All right, we see Gerald Ely joining, so thanks for joining us. Beverly Beatty just has suggestions for Cubase in future to have a flashing pulse on the track you're working on, as when you get so many tracks, you can get lost sometimes with what track you're working on. So one of the things that you could do, and, sometimes we have composers that have, 4,000 tracks, but if you kind of lose, kind of sight, if you come over here, and we say there's going to be probably a track visibility and configurations. So if you just come right over here, there's probably just a preset if you get lost, or you could just say show selected tracks, and that way all the other tracks can be kind of tucked away, and then you could show all tracks. So if you have just like one particular track, you're like, where is it? It's driving me crazy. Just come over here and show selected tracks, and that will kind of get you back to where you are. So I think sometimes you put a pulse, I think from software designs, that sometimes people, like things we have to be aware of. Sometimes like pulses like that can really wig out people with different medical conditions. Like we had one software that could trigger, and if you're epileptic, like sometimes pulses can trigger epileptic reactions in people. So but if you're ever lost, try doing the show selected tracks from the configuration as well. So we see from David M. says, hi Greg, when I use Arturia's pigment, I find it so fast changing sounds in the instrument using Up and down arrows is our way to do this in a Cubase synth. Any keys would do, no mouse. All right, so let's take a look. Let's just add. And sometimes synthesizers will do it faster than instruments that are loading up samples, but let's go ahead and add an instrument track. So let's do like a Retrologue here. All right, so let's say, okay, I'm looking for bass sounds. All right, so let's say if I load that up and don't have it muted. So I think if I have this open, let's see. We just do it on a brand new project. It doesn't have any. All right, so let's just come over here. We'll open up a Retrologue. So I think also if once we have like a sound loaded, if we come over, if you want to do it in the instrument, so let's say, okay, we're looking for bass patches. Let's say we make this. Let's see if we can. So if I just have this open, I arrow down and then hit enter. Go up, enter. No mouse. So give that a try, and I think also once you come over here, we could say, okay, let's come over to Retrologue, and if you wanted to, I think if we come over here, let's say, okay, I want to load up that sound. That I can preview sounds directly from Media Bay. So if you do it from Media Bay, you could also just kind of preview sounds very quickly, use the arrow keys, and you don't even have to hit enter here. So let me know if that works for you, David. Then you could even like have different MIDI files that are captured for playing and previewing sounds as well. See, DJ FKSG says Greg is AI, so probably AI would answer questions better than me. All right, so Obaraj Music says, why does my Cubase lags when I turn off my GPU on my Mac OS Tahoe? So probably a lot of the performance of the system is also going to be utilizing the GPU for processing. So is there a particular reason that you need to turn the GPU off? Because it's probably what makes your computer overall faster as well. All right, so Drazi Eternal says there's a millisecond adjustment tab in each track inspector under the pan. How can I adjust multiple millisecond adjustments at the same time for multiple audio tracks? So I think it might be kind of the same. I'm not sure if we could do it with, at multiple ones at the same time. I don't think that we can. So let's see if we do. Yeah, so I think most of the time, like this might be for like instrument tracks that are, where like maybe a legato string patch that doesn't quite speak, and you could adjust kind of the milliseconds. So it's usually not something like with instrument tracks, you can save it as a preset in a template, but I don't think that there's a way to adjust these multiply because each track may need different amounts. So I don't think that there's a way of adjusting that, but I'll bring that to the attention of the team to see if it's something that could be done since it's been asked by a user. All right, so we see FlyV sent a video of the marker track problem, so I'll see if we get to it in just a little bit. All right, Michael Teams just says, how to change the name of a song after it has been saved as another title. So I think if you just go to your file menu and choose Save As, that you could just give it a completely new name, and that would retain its position within the project folder. So if you have audio files, that link would still be there. And that will go into the same location as the other one. But try just to go to your file menu and click on Save As. All right, so we see Gareth just saying Sinners equals a fun film, deserves best soundtrack Oscar. So yeah, we're cheering for Ludwig at Steinberg. It's always cool going to his studio. He's got a cool setup. Him and Teddy Shapiro share a studio building. I think Teddy did Severance. We see Mark Rabin just says, let's see if we could do this. Mark Rabin's suggestions to see if we could do the offset on track events together. So let's take a look at that, see if that's a possibility. Okay, so I have all these. Let's get to our start. And let's say if we want to switch to milliseconds, so I want these all to start earlier. So let's say we want 52 milliseconds for each start. Let's see if that value has been applied. So if you don't do it at the track inspector level, you can select the events and adjust their start position, and that would be if they're multiply selected, you could adjust the start position for all of the events at the same time. So if you need to do that for like 50 tracks, maybe just select the 50 events and adjust the start position offset here. It's a good suggestion, Mark. Thanks for reminding me of that. So David M says he keeps forgetting to click that like button. So All right, so we see from Spacer584, hi, great question. Is there any way how to get quickly arpeggio, extract notes from chord and chord pads into my track? All right, so I'm not sure if it's, let's say if we come here, if it's like where you have the arpeggio from within the chord track. So let's just quickly add an instrument track. Okay, so let's come over to our chord pads here. All right, so let's say, and let's say I don't have these as playing chords, I have these as a pattern. We'll come over to some of our factory presets. So let's say Dreamy EP ARPs. So now, so when I have the pattern on here, a lot of times people think, okay, I could drag it out, and when you drag it out, it's just going to be a block chord. So kind of the design intention is, as we're working with this, that we have our chord pads that I could just trigger it. And now that I've done that, if I did it all correctly, we will see kind of the resulting. So it's more for kind of capturing a live performance, and now we could see the arpeggios kind of automatically extracted based on the chord pad patterns. So you actually have to kind of play it and hit record, and then it will capture the resulting kind of arpeggios. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to do, Spacer584. All right, so we see from Drowsy Eternal, just says sometimes he has 20 plus vocal tracks and may want to adjust all at once. And when I select them all and adjust, only the first ones adjust. Yeah, so here, again, if I just adjust my start position, so we can see that now we're going to start at 9:30. So I selected all of them, and now they all start at 9:30. If I have one selected, so let's say I move this to 9:27, these will still be at 9:30 when I select this one, because that was set separately. So now, again, if I select all these and we say, okay, let's make this go to 9:22, now the start position will remain kind of relative. So let's see if I do it with, if I come here, let's say 9:20, and I'm going to hold down the command or control key and see if these are all good to the same value. So if you want them all to go to the same value, you could just select the multiple events and adjust in the time range, and that will adjust it for multiples. If they're offset, they will keep the proportionality. And if you wanted them to all go to the same, when you type in an event, hold down the control or command key and then hit enter. Okay, so we see from John Barry, who asks, hi Greg, is there a way of making a MIDI remote script editable? There's no MIDI remote mapping for my hardware, but with no surface editor, and I would like to customize it. So it says there's a MIDI remote mapping for my hardware, but with no surface editor. I would like to be able to customize it. So what I would do, so if you wanted to customize like the parameters of the MIDI remote, so let's say you have something here and you're like, okay, I really want to do something more. Like I wanted to customize all these. If we go to the mapping assistant, so if you click right here, or you could open up the mapping assistant directly from the top, and then you'll see like a little plus sign. So let's say, okay, we want this to be John Barry custom MIDI remote. Okay. And I found that if you need to hit the enter key, or just hit OK, not the enter key. So now I hit OK, and now we have kind of the mapping, but at this point I could just double click and assign our particular page here to whatever functions we want in a MIDI remote. And there are mapping page actions, so if you always want to have a mapping page that takes you to, you could have a button that will take you to a particular mapping page as well. But now, so if you wanted to take like an existing one and customize all of the functions, just click on the plus sign and make a new mapping page. And then once you do that, you have kind of all the controls laid out, and so you could create 10 or 12 different, have kind of the same basics up, but have 10 or 12 different mapping pages to do different functions as you see fit. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to do, John. All right, we see David M has to dip out for about an hour. Okay, sorry, my chat field jumped again. All right, Spacer584 asks, hi Greg, is there any way to set up Cubase that when I choose in chord pads a C sharp minor to see C sharp minor, also on my chord assignment I can only see D flat minor? I did not find how to change it. Okay, so let's say, all right, so let's come over here to chord pads. All right, so let's say we want this to be set up as, let's say, D flat minor. So let's see, I think if we can, if there's a way to do, enharmonic. I know we could do it on the actual chord track. So if I have a chord track, I can drag and drop the chord, and then once it's selected, we can do the enharmonic shift here. Let's see if we can, not sure if we could do it on the actual Alright, so let's say if I come here, let's make this sharp. So I'm not sure if we could do it in the so we could transpose up and down. Yeah, I'm not sure if we could adjust the enharmonics of that. So I don't see a way to do it. I'll do some more research and see if it's possible to do that. But I don't know of a way to. I know how to do it on the chord track itself, but it doesn't seem to translate over. But I'll do some more research on it and see if we have a better answer on Tuesday. Sorry about that. All right, so we see Daniela joining from Bochum, Germany. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so we see, does ARA no more work with Apple? Did try to work with Melodyne since a long time, and it seems ARA stopped to work. So it works in Cubase. I don't think Logic supports ARA, interestingly enough. But, when I come over, let's say I have my project here, and, we want to use an ARA extension, I would just come right over here. So we could use WaveLab and just simply double click. And I'm on my Mac here for the live stream, and then we are in ARA. When I go to spectral layers, that's utilizing ARA. So it works on Cubase, but I don't think Apple Logic supports ARA. Kind of shocking, but you might be working on it. Not sure. Sable Winters just talking in discussion with Michael Teams about moving heavy instruments, and Sable brings up a great point of, I feel sorry for people carrying around a double bass. That's a whole lot of instrument. It's a very awkward and a very fragile instrument as well. So in the middle of orchestra concert I'm doing this weekend, so we've had like 5 or 6 rehearsals in the last 2 weeks. So I always get there early so I get a close parking space. But now they have clever little wheels you can put on the bag and wheel it around. But yeah, it's no fun. But not as bad as the timpanist or the harpist. Michael Teams just says, I always heard you mix low to hear the entire mix. That's good. All right, the Liquid Blue Band. How to set up Groove Agent to sync to live drums so I can replace the snare / bass drum. Okay, hang on. All right, so say we want to do, there's a couple ways to do it. So if you want to do like drum replacement, we could come over here. So let's open up this and say we have a Groove Agent instance in this particular project. So say we have multi-track drum recordings. I have a Groove Agent here. All right, so let's say I want to do, I'm going to select this particular track. We'll come over to the top here. Let's listen for our drums. So let's say I want to replace kick and snare and use Groove Agent. I'm going to double click on my kick track here. And then we go to hit points. So once we're in the sample editor, we'll see hit points. And I want to edit the hit points. And as we look at it, we want to basically make sure we're not including tracks that are bleeding through. Okay, so again, when I come over here, so what we want to do now is we could adjust the threshold a little bit if needed. And then we'll say under the create, we're going to say let's create MIDI notes. I want these to retain the original velocity. I want to put it onto the first selected track, which is where my Groove Agent is. And I hit OK. And now we're triggering Groove Agent. And let's do the same with the snare. So we have that track selected. I'm going to go to my snare. Let's adjust our threshold again so we're not picking up hi-hats. Let's make MIDI notes. Let's put these onto D1. Hit OK. So now I'm going to mute the original kicks so we just hear the Groove Agent. And I'm going to mute the snare. So let's say, okay, I want to make the snare louder. And maybe I want to drop the tuning of the snare. So now that's our kick and snare muted, just being replaced. And if we wanted to have both of them play together, you see we're not going to have any phasing problems. So just double click. So this way we're just kind of using Groove Agent as a sound source. But once you do that double click, go into hit points, adjust the threshold accordingly, open up the create tab, create MIDI notes. You have my Groove Agent track loaded up, and if we look here, we're going to have our kick and snare just completely on the same track. They're kind of stacked on top of each other. I'll just grab my glue gun. And now we can see our kick and snare. We've merged those two events. So that's how you can do drum replacements utilizing Groove Agent in your project. All right, we see Sable thought that question was interesting. Sable's just saying congratulations to Jean-Marie for the Grammy. Yeah, so we had a lot of Cubase winners, Cubase users win. So Circuit, who got producer of the year, I think for Lady Gaga project, it was. He's a Cubase user as well, does all his work in Cubase. All right, so we see Soul Sound Official saying hi to everyone. And we see Sable just says, Greg, you're poking the bear. All right. Michael Team says we haven't heard from Jean-Marie. So, yeah, everyone's hitting him up for presets. He did a whole tirade on it on Facebook. It was kind of funny to listen to. So Pablo is just saying that's the trick, Greg. All right, for WaveLab. He just says, thanks, Greg. You always save my sessions. All right. All right, so we see Steve Green just says, thanks, Greg. One last question. Is there a way of adding more reverb to a single snare note? Let's say the last beat of every second bar in a groove agent pattern. Can't stop my feet. All right. Okay, so let's see if I have that. There's a couple ways to approach it. Okay, so let's say we have this pattern here. Let me switch over to the player mode. Okay, let me just slow it down, something a little more reasonable for that. All right. All right, so let's come over here. There's a couple ways to kind of approach the automation of it. So let's say we want to, we'll go over to our kit. Let's go to our mixer. All right, so let's come over here. Let's say we want to have our send one. All right, so we'll come over here to our effects. And let me just kind of tuck the mixer out. Okay, so let's get to our aux, and let's see, we're going to have reverb. All right, so when we come over, let's open up the mixer again. So let's say we want to look at their snare. All right, but let's say, all right, so we come over here, we see our send one. And let me just take it externally. So I'm not sure if you want to do it externally or if that matters. But let me just... Because we could probably use maybe modulator for this. So let's... So we try loading up one more time. We will try using a modulator. All right, so let's say I want to come here and I have this pattern in. Okay, and we want like every just so say you want every other. All right, so if we come over here, let's go ahead and let's put a reverb. I'm going to take the snare and let's make this snare just out of its own output. So we can come over here to the kit and I want to take this snare and we're going to route this snare. We go into our mixer. So let's say we want to route this to output 2. Okay, so now as we play this event here, so this will be just our snare out. So let's say on my snare out, I want to go to ascend. And we'll go to our send and let's just add a reverb. So we're going to add an effect send here. So let's make it a reverb. All right, so now what we could do is just automate. So let's say we want the 4th one. All right, so let me do that automation again, sorry. So now you could just automate the send going on and off for every other, for the 4th reverb just to the last beat of every second bar. So now when we go here to our automation, that we could just be able to just have that completely automated. So let me know if that makes sense. So we're just going to automate the snare. And we could just, so we probably don't need that. And then if you want to try different reverbs out, you can say, okay. So give that a try. Let me know if that makes sense for you. And you know, Stevie said one last question. You can ask as many as you need. So Sable saying, wow, I need to watch this WaveLab part again this weekend on a multi-export. All right, so we see Pablo just saying, I can't use the Nectar CS12 with WaveLab, but I'm using a Chord Nano pad for triggering some things like plugins. You know, so when you're in WaveLab for the remote control setup, you know, I think there is like a basic MIDI learn. So try not to use maybe remote control 1, but we'll just open this up quickly. So maybe when you come over here to the remote device, try not using, and try setting this. So let's say I want this for my nano control. And then when you click on edit map, that I think that there's like once we have, let's say the transport, that we could just say the MIDI message. So let's say if I come over here and I just hit the play button, and let's say, okay, now I want my stop button. So, we can come over and just kind of remap different. So let's say, okay, this control is modified. Let's save that. So try going through here and be able to assign to different functions. So let's say I come over here and then, so try just doing the mapping there. Sometimes audio editors will have different mapping priorities than traditional digital audio workstations. All right, so we see from Spacer584 says, "Hi Greg, I'm confused when I play a chord using chord pads. And I want to put exactly the chord with all the notes to the chord track. But when I do, it's different notes. AV probably how to avoid this." All right, so let's say we have a chord pad here. Let's just add quick instrument. All right, so now we are here and we're triggering our chord pads. All right, so I'm gonna just create a chord track. Okay, so I'm gonna drag these out to my chord track. Okay. And now we'll say we're going to use our monitor track, so I can click here. So these seem to be the same voicings here when they're dragged out. Now when we go to our Hallian Sonic, let's say the playback track, if I come here to the chord voicings, we could choose to, once we're here, I think that we could also set up like our different chord voicings now. So once you select, let's say we just have the chord track, make sure that you have kind of the same. So let's say I have that chord, so I could trigger this from the chord pads, but when I'm here, we could also just choose to, have this. If we choose, if we say adaptive voices, you can have different inversions of the chord and different chord voicings. So they're still all B flat chords. So try on the chord track itself to uncheck adaptive voicings, and then it should kind of be the same chord voicings right there. So give that a try and let me know if that makes a difference for you. All right, Jazzy Lamel asks, it says, "Hey Greg, can you explain some useful tips on using the selection tool?" Okay, so let's say we have events on our project window. Let me just open up project where it can make a little more sense. try a different one here. Okay, so when we're working with the selection tool, there's 3 modes to the selection tool. So let's say I want to select events, we could do this. Now, as we're working with the selection tool, we could use different tool modifiers to do things. So if I'm here, let's just make this one obviously large and big. All right, so let's say, so now I have my selection tool. When I hover over an event, I could see my fade in and fade outs. I could also choose where this particular event will end or begin. And if you see that it's kind of snapping, that's because it's following the snap value. So if I hit J, that would turn my snap on and off, and we could freely place that particular position. So our bottom right-hand corner chooses where the event ends. Where it begins is bottom left-hand corner. We could adjust kind of our fade position. Another clever thing that we could do, if you have like the range tool here, and if you want to fade into that range and fade out after, just hit the letter A, and then that will automatically do a fade in until that selected range. The right center edge would allow us to make copies. So if we wanted to duplicate, we could just kind of click on the right center and drag it across. We can make copies. We could also hold down the Alt or Option key and go to directly to the bottom right hand corner and drag that over. That was kind of the older method. That's kind of a nice little Easter egg, but we made it more obvious by going to the right center edge. When I hold down the Alt or Option key and click in the lower part, we can split the particular event. So now I could just come right over here and split. And now if we select a particular event, we could just hit the delete or backspace and have that area kind of eradicated. Going to the lower left-hand corner, we could adjust the clip gain of the event. So if you want this to be louder or softer, or if you hold down Control or Command plus the particular plus the Shift key, we could just do that anywhere just by grabbing. So now once we have our mode, so I could resize my events here by again going to my different modes, but we also have 3 different modes for the sizing. So I could say sizing moves contents. So if I want the beginning to start here but end later, I could just simply, as I move, the beginning of that file will just kind of move over. If I grab this file and I move it over, we can say, okay, the end of the file needs to be right here, and we'll let the beginning of the file fall where it will. The third mode, so we have kind of normal sizing. Sizing moves content, but there's also sizing applies time stretch. So if I need this event to fit into that amount of time, that will speed up and slow down the audio without changing the pitch. One other helpful mode that we can do with the sizing tool is just to hold down the Alt Option and Command Control key, and then what we could do is actually just kind of do slip editing. So I could take the event and slip it within the event. And this is assuming that the event is not at full size. So if it's at full size, you can't really do too much with it. But if like here, if the event has been trimmed, we could just come right over and move and slip the event just like that. So those are some of the things that you can do with the selection tool to help with your editing. All right, so we see from Jazzy Eternal says, thanks, Greg. The offset works for me. Thanks. All right. Okay, so we see Drowsy Eternal says, hey Greg, where are the plain chord pad presets located in Cubase 15? So when we come over, let's say, let's just open up, let's say our chord pads here. So I'm not sure what you mean by plain chord pad presets. So I have made some presets for chord pads, and these I kind of made for like major, and they are available, I believe, to download on the Cubase Nation Discord. So there's a lot of like really cool and interesting different chord progressions, but I noticed that a lot of people wanted a major chord progression, a minor chord progression. So I did it for all the different modes. So if you want to open up a Lydian mode, you could do that. Let's say minor. So there are presets that are available of all of the 7 different musical modes, so that you could have those chords laid out for you. So I'm not sure if that's what you mean by playing chord presets. You can make one, but again, just go to the Cubase unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, and I think you can find the presets directly there if you want kind of, you know, more basic chord progressions. Okay, so we see just follow up from see Spacer584 says, thank you, Greg, really appreciate it. John Barry says, cheers, but I do also need to add surface elements to cheers, Greg. So let's say if I wanted to add, let's say if I go to my MIDI remote here, let's see if I have my, you know, so while you're here, you know, if we go to, let's say if we come over here, let's go to like the settings page here. So, all right, let me just find a spot. So once we go to, so let's say if we have this and we want to add other controls. So let me see if I want. It's not the mapping page. Let me just. But yeah, it's like where we first make the controller. Just, it's not the mapping page. I want to say it's. Yeah, but generally it's going to be. I don't think it's in. It's not that. So, but I think, but usually when you come here, you know, let's see if we set this up here. So let's select, let's say our Nano Control 2. I think it's it's already being utilized. But usually when you kind of go to set it up initially, but let me know what controller it is, John. And I can see if I can get that dialed in for Tuesday's live stream. All right, so we see Henshahar. Hi, Greg. Is there a way to create a key command or even a MIDI command to lower and raise an octave for a VST instrument channel? I don't mean in a key editor or using inspector. Okay. So let's say if we have a MIDI device here, so let's see if I can just go to project as a MIDI. All right, so let's say we have all right, so if you don't want to do it in the MIDI editor, if you come here, we could just say we just come here, so let's say we want to just transpose. All right, but let's see if we could do that with MIDI modifier. So let's say, okay, I want to save this as preset. Okay, so say we're playing along here. All right, so if we switch this preset here to all right, make sure I have the track and event selected. So if you want a MIDI command, all right, so if you just want this to, we could also just come over here. Let's make a logical editor preset. Okay, so we're going to say type is equal to note, pitch, we're going to add 12. Okay, and we'll save this as a preset. All right, and let's subtract 12. We'll save this as a preset. Okay, so now I've saved those as presets. Let's go to my MIDI Remote. I could trigger those with different keyboard shortcuts, but let's come over here and say, Okay, let me just... So we'll say... So now, while it plays, I could just do the edits on a particular note here. So let's say... So you could just trigger that particular right here and just say, okay, let's just take that in. And just trigger that particular key command. So you could just trigger logical editor presets, and again, to make those logical editor presets, just come to your MIDI, and now you could just say you want to say transform, type is equal to note, pitch you want to subtract 1 octave, 12 semitones, 1 octave, or add 12 semitones. So that way you have different commands to, while it's playing, you'll see the changes in the key editor, but if you want to trigger it from keyboard shortcuts, you could, again, come over here to your key commands, and you could assign it in the process logical editor. So you could up 1 octave, down 1 octave, assign those to key commands without having to go into any editor or inspector. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, Gerald Ely just says, in your project Untitled 7, you have a VST track titled A Virgin Anna Pad. All right, take a look, see what instrument that is. I think it's a Retrologue. The mod wheel. So I think that's with the new bank of presets that comes with Absolute 7. Okay, so we see from Sable Winters, says, question, Greg, will you demo a use case for Retrologue? So Retrologue is just a fantastic, anytime you would want pretty much any analog, like virtual analog synthesizer, Retrologue is just kind of a great place to be. So let's say, if you want to have... So basically what you're going to have is your sound sources. You have 3 oscillators. So we'll come over here. And then you could have each of the oscillators be kind of like a multi. So if you actually want to detune one oscillator, so in a lot of instruments, you would need like 4 oscillators just to get that one single oscillator sound. And then if you wanted to add another oscillator to kind of blend in, you could adjust the level between. So let's say we have these oscillators, let's add a noise. So if we just listen to the noise by itself, and we could have that as white, pink, So let's blend that in. And we could add a sub oscillator as well. Now, and once we're here, we could say, okay, let's have our filters. Your resonance, what type of filter do you want to have? And then here we could have kind of like your global ADSR. So when I hit a note, if I want it to fade in. And when I release a note, we could have that sound kind of linger on. Or if I want to end exactly when I cut the note off. Or if we want it to be controlled from velocity, so I could have, let's say we want to adjust our velocity here. We have kind of a modulation matrix here, so if we wanted to say, okay, I want the mod wheel to control cutoff, but if I wanted to control other parameters, we could just select kind of like your LFO, and then, you know, at this point, we could just drag it over to different sources that we want to modulate. So we can say, okay, now we want to do a pattern, and we want this LFO to, you know, we'll come over here to our LFO shape. So let's say if I want the pattern to gradually pan back and forth, and I want the frequency to be faster. And then you're going to have the filter envelope here as well. So if you wanted the so just all sorts of great analog, virtual analog synthesis. So it's a real monster instrument. Just because it comes with Cubase, don't underestimate it. So. Or Drowsy Eternal asks, hey Greg, I think I forgot how to use to generate harmony voices after making chords with the chord track. Can you show me this, please? In Cubase 15. All right. Okay, so we want to make harmonies. So let's come over. Let's say we have our piano track here. I'm going to drag the piano to the chord track. So we could have the chord track optimized here. We're going to select just a region here. Okay, so I selected that region. Let's come over to our audio menu, and we'll see generate harmony voices. So let's make it 3 harmony voices. And I'll come here, and because it knows what the chords are, the harmonies will be correct. So it always makes sense to do. So now as we listen to it, so kind of select the region with the range tool that you want to utilize for the harmonies. Go to your audio menu to generate harmony voices. How many harmony voices you want, and now we can. All right. So we see from Jackie Barr, how would you disable all plugins temporarily? All right, so if we're in the mix console, we we can come over here. So let's see if we go to our setup sections. Let's see, we could have all right, so let's say if I'm in my mix console here, we could have what we call state buttons. So, and we could right click and you'll see state buttons. All right, and that's what these are here. So let's say as you're working, I could bypass all the modulators, all inserts, channel strip, sends, and EQ. So if you just go to the mixer, and at the top, you could just come right over here. So that's all plugins and modulators off. So look for those state buttons at the top of the mix console. See, Sable Winter says, my harpist here has her husband carry the harp on his back. She works a lot. That's a lot of love. So, yeah, I wouldn't ask my wife to move my bass. So, Sharon's probably like 6 inches taller than her. So, but yeah, harps are no fun. You know, it's always interesting to see who at like an orchestra rehearsal, who gets there early. It's always the percussionist, the bassist, and the harpist will be there early because they want good parking. All right, we see Tiago joining from Brazil. Let's see, Clace just says, thank you, Greg, for recommending the Audient ASP 800, high build and sound quality. So yeah, my friend was able to let me play with one for a while, and I got it from him. He was the Audient distributor in the United States for a number of years. Great to see, wonderful to see Graham Witcher on from Oxford, England. Gareth says now that Graham is on. Quick, stop messing around. The manager is here. All right. You have to all behave well. All right, so you see Gerald Ely says, have to go. Thanks for all you do, Greg. Watching you sample Retrologue sounds led me to buy the vintage sound set and a couple more. Have a great weekend. Yeah, the synth, I think the synth presets, especially, like I think the whole upgrade price of Absolute 7 for the Carrier 8 presets that come with it for FM Lab is worth the whole price of admission, let alone all the other great libraries you get. There you see Pablo is back from dinner. Okay. Gareth is giving us our English lesson for Spaniards today. Meat can be anything from cow to human. All right. Sorry, my chat field jumped. Okay. Okay, reading through comments here. All right, Jazz Dude shared where to find presets that I've contributed. All right, we see Recyclop joining from Finland. Wonderful to have you on the community today. see discussion if there's too much chatter. No, as long as everyone's having fun, I'm just like an accompanist here for the live stream. So, all right. So we see from Soul Sound Official question: how to sync each mixer to the mixer controller faders when using one mixer at the time from the 4 mixers, and is it possible to do the Project Mixer 2? All right, so let's say I'll just go to a different project here. Okay, so how to sync each mixer to the mixer controller faders. All right, so usually, like when I'm in my MIDI remote here. All right, so, and let's say, like here I have my mixer, so I have, and once I have kind of like the selected channels open here, just, we're able to just kind of, take these particular elements here, and we could see which channels are controlled. So let's say if we go to the mix console, that we could just simply bank over, and where we see this little white outline, this would indicate that this is, as we're working with this, that these are kind of the 8 channels that are controlled. So if I go to that mixer, just make sure, I'm not sure if I'm totally understanding, but now I can see that like these particular channels are controlled if I select from the bank message or from the particular channel here, that, we can see once I click in this bank of 8, that the mixer will kind of automatically jump to those particular zones. So regardless of what mixer we're in, so for mixer 2, mix console 3 or 4, that we still have kind of all of those particular channel settings from the controller is reflected in all of the particular mixer channels. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding Soul Sound Official. All right, great to see Rick from Bratman Studio. Okay. Okay, so we see from John Barry, says that he's using a Mackie control replacement, the Icon P1 Nano. It adds color mapping, time display names, which I cannot create using the MIDI Remote editor in Cubase. So some of those, when you go into the MIDI Remote, I'm not a developer of any kind, but once you're kind of in the MIDI Remote, there is kind of like a whole, let's see if we go to like the scripting tools, but there is kind of like a whole scripting area. So let's say if we blow this up, but you'll see kind of like a scripting tools area, and this is where you could go to work on scripting so that you could actually send different, you could configure like, the time display to be kind of sent back. So this is like the MIDI Remote API. So if you're smart enough to be able to do this, but I think I've sent Icon copies of Cubase so that they're able to do this as well. And it could be, if you're running into issues, that the Mackie control and the MIDI remote could be conflicting. All right, so David M just says your answer of selecting presets with up and down arrows and enter works for me. Thanks. All right, let me go to, I know we had some questions that were mailed in before we run out of time. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. All right. All right, so one of the first questions we had is, I think there was a send in. It says, why is my Groove Agent not playing back my kick tracks? All right, and I got the project here, so let me just open it up. Okay, so when we looked at this, let me just make sure I have the... Sorry about that. Let me just... So I have the project here real quick. Let me see. Okay, so I think this is the project here. Sorry about that. Okay, so when we were playing back a Groove Agent project here, so let's say... All right, let me just... All right, let me see if I could just revert this one more time. All right, let me just see if I could just add the instrument real quick. Or I could probably just open up the project directly. Let's see if we can do that. So we have the same sounds. Okay. So we have kind of our Groove Agent part here, and then it's going to change. And we see like two kick drums, but we don't hear them. But when we look at the actual note assignment that's going on here, it's going to be set to B0, and probably the kicks are meant to be at C0. So I'm just going to move those down, and now as we play this back, probably going to be the same for this, where these, instead of being sent to the kick drum, they're being sent to the fill. So now as we come back here, we can hear the pattern. So to me, it just looks like these were maybe set to the wrong pitch. So check just to make sure that if you move those from B0 to C1, that you'll be in good shape for that. Our next question was, we did that. We did a WaveLab one for Pablo. All right. Next one was, I was watching a video on YouTube about working with the sampler track initially, but then dropping the samples into Groove Agent by clicking on a button. Question: how do I get all 12 of my slices onto the pads? As you can see, my first photo, the sample cut to 12 slices on the sampler. They may not be perfect slices at the moment, as I'm experimenting with this cool option. I click on the MIDI keyboard and they play fine. Every slice 1 through 12 in the keypad, but they're set to C3, C4 approximately. Great. There are 12 slices showing in my sampler track, but what I was expecting to see on the Groove Agent is the 12 pads with the 12 slices of sample data on each of the pads, but it looks wonky. Says it shows only 8 of the samples in the upper half. Groove Agent places them in the upper part of the Groove Agent, and then possibly placing their 4 somewhere else within Groove Agent. Not sure where the last 4 are. Is it possible to get all 12 of those slices on the 12 pads, 1 through 12 in order? All right, so let's take a look at it. So we're going to come over here to our other project here. All right, so let's say we have a drum loop that's going on here, and I want to drag this into my sampler track. Okay, so we'll go to our sampler control, and as we do this, we're going to drag that down, and let's just, again, come over here. Let's go to our slices, and so let's say we have a number of slices here. Once we're doing this, and there's a function, you may have to kind of make the sampler track a little larger depending on your screen resolution, but let's say I have these slices done for this particular loop. All right, so we come here, and I'll turn that down. Sorry about that. All right, so as we do this, we could actually kind of just pick our particular root key. Now, maybe I want the root, so when I come over here, let's take this, and I'm going to transfer this to Groove Agent SE. All right, so now we do that, we can see that our slices are transferred to our different pads, but depending upon where the actual slicing starts, so we picked our root node of C3, so that's where it's going to start placing the particular pads. So, and we have basically 8 banks of 16 pads, so 128 sounds. So now when I go to the next bank, we could see that these are carried over into the next bank. So they're still playable via MIDI, but so what I would maybe do is when we're here, if we wanted to kind of start this whole process again. So let's say we want to come over, is maybe just to reassign the root note here. So we see the root key. Let's set this to C1. All right, and now when I do the slice, okay, we're going to transfer this over to Groove Agent SE, and it's because of where the root note is. Usually, like one of the first, for C1 will be in the bottom left-hand corner of one of the pads. So we're going to say transfer now to Groove Agent SE, And now when we do this, all of the samples are mapped onto the same bank. So basically you have like 0 through 128. So depending upon what the root key is, they may be spread out across 2 different banks. But if we assign like the root key, if you have 12 samples, if you assign it to like C1, it's not going to change the pitch, but it just knows like where it's going to start mapping those particular samples to. All right. Next question. How do I change the blue colored notes section under the chord pad section C0 to C6 to move the blue section to the right of the transpose notes? When I play the chords, they're too low in the scale on my keyboard. We're using the mouse to trigger the pads. There's somewhere in Cubase to permanently change them to the chords to 1 octave up without having to press the arrow up key 12 times. To have them play in a higher octave range, like C2, for example, across the octaves. Okay, so when we go to our chord pads, so let's come over here to our chord pads, and we can see that we will have these blue notes that will trigger the particular chords. So we say, okay, let's... so if we wanted to, to change the mapping, we'll see like this little MIDI icon in the upper left-hand corner, or upper right-hand corner rather. So if we see that, now what we want to do is we can see the chord pad triggers. Let's set this to C3, and we can see that these blue notes will just kind of go up. So let's say, okay, I want to move those up to C3, or let's say C4, and we want that going from C4 to E5. So now I could have those particular trigger notes at a different octave. So once again, to set that up, you want to just go to your settings right here, and then the pads remote range start. You could remap the range of all the different trigger notes for, for playing tensions, adding transposition modifiers, voicing modifiers, etc., or block chords if you have that turned on. So just come right here and adjust that particular range. Next question. I was watching a YouTube video and they brought up the Autumn Breeze chord preset. Why is it that when I bring up the same preset on my chord pads, it seems the names arranged in a different order than the video? Different tensions too versus his video. As you can see in my photo, the defaulted E flat root key is the same, but next to MIDI image on the left, it shows E flat minor. So looking at the 2 videos, there are different display options. So I have the Autumn Breeze preset loaded here. There are different kind of preset options for how these are laid out. So let's say if you wanted to do it from a MIDI keyboard, or if you wanted to trigger it from drum pads. So if we come to the very far upper right hand corner, we'll see this option that's the chord pads display settings. So once we click here, we can see the pad layout. You want to make sure that probably what they have, I think what you have is the grid settings in your picture, and they have it set for the keyboard. So just switch between those 2 settings directly there. All right, and the next question, we covered that, and we're discussing this last week when I was having a brain cramp on it. How to get to different parameter pages of plugins with the MIDI remote. So the MIDI mapping page. All right, so let's say if I am here and I have my MIDI remote mapping page, what we could do if we have a plugin that has a lot of extended controls. So let's say we come over here to like my multiband compressor. Okay, and we talked last week how we could set up like banks of parameters that could be controlled from a standard MIDI controller. So let's say we have 8 encoders. And we could set this up for kind of our standard layout. So we could say, okay, the number of cells per page. All right, so basically this will be like bank 1 of controls, bank 2 of controls. Now, how we can set this up with the MIDI remote so that we could toggle to get access to not only the first bank of controls, but to all of the other banks of controls. If you have a plugin that has, 64 parameters that you want to be able to address. When we go to the MIDI mapping setup, and where I was having my brain cramp was you go to like the selected channel. Let's go to the selected track. And we want to go to the insert and strip effects. We'll say, let's come over here to parameters. So you'll see a setup. Here's where you want to map the same number of encoders that you have physically. You want to map there. And then for each of the parameters, there's an actions. So we can say, let's go to the next insert bank or the previous insert bank. So as soon as we come over here, we see the actions. So we see next plugin parameter bank, previous plugin parameter bank. So we could assign those to 2 buttons on our MIDI remote. And then instead of using focus quick controls, we would use parameter 1 through 8. And those parameters would control kind of the first bank. When you hit the next bank message over here, then those 8 encoders would control the second bank. So if we go to our previous remote, we could now just come over here and switch between bank 1, set of parameters, bank 2, bank 3, and we use parameters 1 through 8 on the encoders. And that would control kind of the 8 defined pages, and we could use the previous bank or next bank to go to the next set of 8 or the previous set of 8 controls. All right, with that, I see that we are just about out of time. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. And if you've learned new things or new tips or tricks, please make sure that you hit the like button. Subscribe to the... Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that. We'll be doing this next Tuesday. I'll just get that macro dialed in. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to wish everyone just a great weekend. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you back on Tuesday. Goodbye.